Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine, January 9, 2023 Observer Newsletter. Vince McMahon plotting WWE return, Dana White physical altercation with wife. By Observer staff. Match of the week, Kenny Omega vs. Will Ospreay, January 4th Tokyo Dome Performer of the Week, Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay. Vince McMahon announced on January 5th that he was taking action regarding the company to capitalize on a unique opportunity to maximize long-term value for WWE shareholders. He said that he had earlier the day written to the WWE Board of Directors that he had elected himself and former co-presidents Michelle Wilson and George Barrios to the Board of Directors, and he would be removing 3 members of the current board. He also said he was going to elect himself to be put back in control of the company as the chairman of the board. Mr. McMahon's new role will enable unified decision-making through the company's upcoming media rights negotiations and a parallel full review of the company's strategic alternatives, which Mr. McMahon believes is the right course of action and in the best interests of WWE and WWE shareholders amidst the current dynamics in the media and entertainment industry. As Mr. McMahon has communicated to the board, he believes there is a narrow window of opportunity to create significant value for all shareholders and that to do so, the strategic alternatives review must occur in tandem with the media rights negotiations. He also expressed to the board that he believes these 2 initiatives require Mr. McMahon's direct participation, leadership, and support as controlling shareholder, said McMahon in the release. WWE is entering a critical juncture in its history with the upcoming media rights negotiations coinciding with increased industry-wide demand for quality content and live events and with more companies seeking to own the intellectual property on their platforms, said McMahon. The only way for WWE to fully capitalize on this opportunity is for me to return as executive chairman and support the management team in the negotiations for our media rights and to combine that with a review of strategic alternatives. My return will allow WWE, as well as any transaction counterparties, to engage in these processes knowing they will have the support of the controlling shareholder. Prior to delivering written consent, Mr. McMahon sent 2 separate letters to the board in late December in which he expressed the urgency of his return to the company as executive chairman and his desire to work collaboratively with the board and management team. Following conversations with representatives of the company both before and after Mr. McMahon's most recent letter on December 31st, Mr. McMahon determined, consistent with his rights as controlling shareholder, that the steps announced today are necessary to maximize value for all WWE shareholders. McMahon's release said, Ms. Wilson and Mr. Barrios are highly qualified directors whose professional experience positions them well to help the company achieve the best possible outcomes in both initiatives. As former WWE co-presidents and board members, they are intimately familiar with industry dynamics and the organization's operations and have helped guide the company through past successful media rights negotiations. I look forward to working closely again with Michelle and George, as well as the company's remaining directors and management team, who have my full support and confidence. WWE has an exceptional management team in place, and I do not intend for my return to have any impact on their roles, duties, or responsibilities. In conjunction with the changes to WWE's board, Mr. McMahon's written consent also includes certain amendments to the company's bylaws to ensure that WWE's corporate governance continues to properly enable and support shareholder rights. These changes will be detailed in a Schedule 13D amendment to be filed by Mr. McMahon and a Form 8K to be filed by the company in the coming days. McMahon's first attempt to return to WWE is reportedly unanimously opposed by the WWE Board of Directors according to an article in the Wall Street Journal. The article also confirmed that McMahon wants to sell the company now. Given the unique media situation where a lot of the giant conglomerates are losing money with streaming not being profitable and ad dollars moving away from television, making revenues decline and stock price drops, the window for a giant WWE sale may be weaker and more uncertain as time goes on. The media landscape is changing rapidly and there is a lot of fear throughout it because of stock prices dropping because Wall Street wants profits now rather than the idea streaming hopefully will become very profitable for the major conglomerates. The story noted what they had already reported, that McMahon is now making direct moves to return to the company and that they are looking to sell the company. The board, which includes daughter Stephanie and son-in-law Paul Levesque, didn't think him being back was a good idea. This was before his announced power play took place the day the story broke, but they did have the details in the story of the power play. The issue with bringing him back was not just the look of doing so, but if stock prices drop, the company and its board will open itself up to potential class action suits. The story said that McMahon, who has the majority voting share power, was going to, through his controlling 80% of the voting shares, elect himself, and would also vote in Barrios and Wilson to the board of directors. He would then get the board to put him back in control as the chairman. Vince McMahon attempted to come back, noted one person in the company familiar with everything. Board shut him down. So now he takes it to the shareholders. When he had someone leak out he's returning, Wall Street freaks out about the protracted fight. Stock goes from 80, bolstered from rumors of sale, to 68. Now he sends out a press release, officially announcing not the exploration but the actual intent to prep for sale. Stock jumps in after hours back to 80. It ends up with a direct pitch to the shareholders at the annual meeting, or it ends up with WWE cutting a deal with him, and potentially George and Michelle, or he'll cast them aside without second thought. Or it ends up in a bloodbath with a fight that plays outright to the shareholders and a call for a vote. Or it ends up in court. Lot of ways this can play out. Another question asked regarding a potential legal fight is the role of Jerry McDevitt according to someone in the company. Will McDevitt be allowed to represent Vince in trying to take back the company, or since he has done work for the company for so many years? Would that be a conflict? That's going to be an interesting part of this battle as well. When it comes to a shareholder fight, Vince owns 81.0% of the voting shares, even thought he owns closer to 35% of the total stock. Stephanie McMahon owns 5.2%. Linda McMahon owns 1.6%. Paul Levesque owns 0.01% and Shane McMahon doesn't own any. Lindsell Train Limited, the largest stockholder other than Vince McMahon, controls 3.2% of voting shares, BlackRock controls 1.7% and the Vanguard Group controls 1.1%. McMahon had fired Barrios and Wilson, who were the co-presidents of the company, on January 30, 2020, because of differences of opinion regarding the future of WWE Network and other disagreements, which caused a major stock share drop. While the WWE Network was successful, it never came close to the numbers they had projected. In August, Nick Khan was hired as the new company president, and after the McMahon scandal broke, Khan and Stephanie McMahon took over as co-CEOs and Frank Riddick was named president. The idea would be to put them in, take out 3 of the current members, and from that point scare the other members into allowing him back in as chairman, with the implication he would replace them with people who would vote him back into the position. By doing so, he would replace Stephanie and Khan in running the company. It was not clear where this would leave either of them. The story said that McMahon sent a formal letter to the board last month, detailing his reasons for wanting to return. He was looking to spearhead a strategic review process, and feels there is a narrow window to kick off negotiations for a sale with the media rights deals coming due. While the story didn't say so, the uncertain media environment could lessen their value at sale, and also result in a not getting a big rights increase. The current share price of the company is based on a new rights deal for Raw and SmackDown that is expected to be in the range of $700 million. A deal that comes up lower will likely lead to a share price decline in the event no sale is completed by that time. But going public with talks of negotiations imminent for a sale will make the share prices increase, and thus the danger of lowering the share price with a McMahon return, and the class action lawsuits that could follow, has a lower percentage of happening. Negotiating a sale with NBCU as part of the rights deal changes the ballgame greatly going forward. The media landscape is uncertain, but WWE is very powerful right now, with it holding steady as television is declining, and it being a very valuable potential streaming property. Even with an uncertain media future, they could get an increase by having multiple suitors. With business rumors already out from John Arand of Sports Business Journal, who predicted that NBCU could end up with SmackDown and put it on the NBC network itself, as a precursor to buying the company. The idea of the next day streaming rights that Hulu has until the end of September being bid on by Peacock also makes all the sense in the world, which would make WWE a key part of network, cable and streaming for NBCU. McMahon's letter said he believed right now more companies are looking to own the intellectual property they have on their streaming platforms, making a WWE sale right now very attractive. If these services cut back on expenses, it would make them less likely to want to make a purchase that would likely have to be in excess of $6 billion. The board wrote back to McMahon that they would be prepared to initiate a review process and would welcome working with him on it, but they told him they unanimously agreed his return to the company wouldn't be in the best interest of the shareholders, citing people who have seen the letters. However, whether it's the first open acknowledgement that they are open to sell imminently or McMahon being back, shares closed at $72.04 at the end of trading on January 5th. After hours saw the stock skyrocket to $80.30 after McMahon's release basically confirmed his returning was more than a rumor and that the idea of a sale, which would be almost surely at well over the stock market value of the company, which at this writing would be $5,974,570,000. If there is a sale now, investors would be looking at a strong, quick, and profitable return. Mcmahon also wrote that there would be a filing in the next few days detailing changes that he would be making for the company's bylaws, or at least attempting to make. As noted before, Mcmahon is blaming people who pushed him into leaving the company for his doing so, thinking that if he just had let time pass, the issues would go away. This also has to make the talent nervous because there have been many hirings of people Mcmahon had previously fired, and many popular directions and changes of the company and its product after he left. Plus, recent hirees under the Con/Stephanie regime were not Vince hires, and they would also have to be nervous. The board's letter back reportedly asked Mcmahon to confirm his commitment to repay the expenses of the investigation against him, and also asked that he not attempt to return until government investigations of the charges are completed. Both federal prosecutors and the Securities and Exchange Commission have started inquiries into the $12 million known in settlements to women that were alleged to have had affairs with either he or John Laurinaitis, who is also no longer with the company. Mcmahon responded back that he remains willing to work to repay any costs of what he called reimbursement of reasonable expenses for the investigation that isn't covered to insurance. But he would not agree to not return to the company until after the government investigation is completed. He also told the board that unless he is back as executive chairman, he would not approve of any sale the company negotiated without him, nor would he agree to allow any media rights deal offered for Raw, SmackDown and the Next Day rights currently held by Hulu, that expire at the end of September, as well as other key deals. Essentially, if they want to sell, he will block it, because once it is sold, he will have no way in because he would no longer control the voting shares. But at the same time, he does want to sell the company, but do it while in charge so the deal could benefit him and he can work himself into being kept in charge after the sale. While if they sell, there is a good chance he will never get back in, because all of his leverage to return is based on his voting shares that will be gone once the sale is complete. The timing of the uncertain media times and the new contract being negotiated this year makes the situation more tense across the board. UFC President Dana White and his wife of 26 years got into a physical altercation on New Year's Eve while they were both drinking and partying in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. White, his wife, and the 3 kids were on vacation. White and his wife had been drinking heavily in a VIP section of a club, and a phone video emerged of the incident. It started with Ann at the bar looking sad. Dana grabbed her left hand and she slapped him in the face with her right hand. Dana slapped her back and then went for another slap that appeared to have been blocked and went for another that it appeared she blocked, and it was quickly broken up. The incident lasted a few seconds. The video first aired on TMZ, and White was on TMZ attempting to explain an embarrassing situation and offered no excuse for it. White appeared on TMZ and was very apologetic, saying that he has always said that you never put your hands on a woman, and he did. He said due to drinking he didn't remember the incident, but said that was no excuse, and said he knew people would say a lot negative about him and that he will deserve it. In the video, the two were shown dancing, and then White said something to her and she slapped him in the face. He immediately slapped her back and seemingly went to do it again before it was broken up. White said in his interview with TMZ multiple times how the two of them have been married nearly 30 years and have known each other since they were 12, and how his wife is his best friend. He said that everything was very quickly fine between them and they stayed in Mexico on their vacation. My wife and I were out on Saturday night on New Year's Eve, and unfortunately that's what happened, White said. I'm one of the guys, you've heard me say for years there's never, ever an excuse for a guy to put his hands on a woman, and now here I am on TMZ talking about it. My wife and I have been married for almost 30 years, we've known each other since we were 12 years old. We've obviously been through some shit together. We've got 3 kids, and this is one of those situations that's horrible. I'm embarrassed, but it's also one of those situations that right now, we're more concerned about our kids. We have 3 kids, and obviously since the video popped up, we've shown the kids the video. We're more focused on our family right now. People are going to have opinions on this, and most of the people's opinions would be right, especially in my case. You don't put your hands on a woman ever. My wife and I love each other. We've been together for a very long time. We've known each other since we were very little, and this is just one of those unfortunate situations. There was definitely a lot of alcohol involved, but that's no excuse. I literally am making no excuses for this at all. It's never happened before. It's the first time that it's ever happened, and people are going to say what they're going to say. It is what it is, and whatever people do say is deserved. I deserve it. It happened. I don't know why it happened. My wife and I have apologized to each other. We've apologized to our kids, and this is one of those things where everybody is going to chime in. I could care less what anybody else thinks about this. Right now what we're more concerned about are our kids and taking care of our family. That was the beginning of it and the end of it. We're still on vacation. We're obviously best friends, she's my wife and we had too much to drink, and whatever happened that night happened. That was it and it was done. And White released a public statement saying Dana and I have been married for almost 30 years. To say this is out of character for him is an understatement. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Unfortunately, we were both drinking too much on New Year's Eve and things got out of control on both sides. We've talked this through as a family and apologized to each other. I just hope people will respect our privacy for the sake of our kids. At press time, Endeavor, the parent company of UFC, nor the UFC itself, has not made any kind of a statement. Reporters have been told that White's response to the story was the TMZ interview. As of this point, there have been no direct repercussions on White himself as far as his UFC position. In this day and age, the nature of the video is such that White's position as the face of the company is problematic, yet White as a public figure was actually, because of his being the lead promoter, spokesperson and public figure, made him from a public standpoint more of a company face of a specific product than even a major sports league commissioner. As much as WWE and Mcmahon were synonymous, UFC and Dana White were even more so, since Vince had stepped out of the public spotlight years ago as far as public appearances and interviews except in select cases. A UFC without White is hard to fathom, but White in his longtime role in UFC after the video surfaced is something that will haunt both UFC and Endeavor, even with his immediate apology. The Power Slap League reality television show and league itself could be in jeopardy because White's visibility was the key in marketing it, and there is no way one would think White could be part of such a product in front of the camera going forward. Whether he could be for UFC is questionable in this day and age. White himself has repeatedly said that you can't ever put your hands on a woman and there is no coming back from that, although others would note UFC did hire and push Greg Hardy for years. On January 2nd, the day the story broke, it was the 7th most searched for topic on the internet in the US. The timing of something like this is never good for the public face of a major sport in this day and age. The reality show, where White was to be the face of the company and that White and Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta were behind, had been taped and promoted for weeks to debut on January 11th at 10 p.m., with the AEW Dynamite lead-in, is no longer listed on the TBS schedule. For both January 11th and January 18th, the date the company lists the full schedule, Young Sheldon reruns are on the schedule from 10 to 11 p.m., in the spot Power Slap was scheduled. There are long-term schedules that list the show as debuting on February 8th, so at this moment the appearance seems to be to move the show back a month and let the story run its course. But obviously this would all be up in the air. UFC sources told MMA Fighting that the show's debut was just being delayed 1 week and would debut on January 18th, even with Young Sheldon being listed by TBS for that time slot. All commercials for the show, which were built around White, were removed from all Turner broadcasting stations. In addition, the mentions of Power Slap have been removed by the TBS website. However, by press time TBS did say it was only going to delay the debut by 1 week and it would start on January 18th. It's obviously a really bad fit right now to have White as the public face and promoting such a league. The sport itself was problematic at best with concerns about CTE. The league was certainly a gamble in the first place as if it could be successful, but without White's involvement, this thing was never getting to television in the first place. Its odds of survival without White as the public face decreased significantly, but right now is a bad time, to say the least, for him to be promoting such a thing. In a move that affects many businesses including pro wrestling, the Federal Trade Commission on January 5th is proposing a rule to ban non-compete clauses in business. The rule would ban labor contracts that prevent workers from leaving one company for a competitor in the same field, or from starting a competing business after their employment ends. Non-competes are believed to be part of deals for between 20% and 45% of workers. Studies claim that non-competes that affect startups reducing competition in fields. This would generally be seen as good within pro wrestling, although not all would say so. Most companies in wrestling do not use non-competes to begin with, and talent is free to join another company when their contracts expire, or if they let them go, they don't hold them to a non-compete. WWE is the obvious exception, and while this sounds good for talent, there are two sides to that issue. The provision is written to apply to both employees and independent contractors. For WWE, if a performer's contract expires, they are free to appear with a competitor the next week. However, if, like in the case of Renee Paquette or in the most famous case, Brock Lesnar, someone under a longer-term deal asks for a release, to get that release they have to agree to a non-compete term. In the case of Paquette, that was for 1 year as far as working for a direct competitor, AEW, but she was allowed to do other projects such as her own podcast. In these situations, it could be that WWE would be less likely to release people because they could directly go to a competitor. In the case of talent, these usually apply to either talent asking to leave who are under contract, or in most cases, talent hat is fired with tie left on their contracts. When somebody is released, such as Mandy Rose a few weeks back, there would be a 90-day period they couldn't work for opposition. For some who can get a similar high-paying job elsewhere, it does delay their debut. For many, if not most, this would just eliminate 3 more months of being paid under terms of their contract, and in most cases, it would actually cost them money because they couldn't earn nearly what they are making on that contract outside of WWE. Also, the key to this for WWE is that they don't want somebody who has been on their television show appearing on somebody else's television show right away. For example, if they chose to do cutbacks, as they did to many, instead of telling them they are released and then paying them for 90 days, they could make the call, remove them from television for 90 days, and then tell them they are fired, and it accomplishes the same thing. This will lead to a higher level of paranoia among talent not being used on television, although that exists now because talent does no company history. It also should be noted from a WWE standpoint that the new regime has not been firing talent under contract at a similar rate to the old regime. Obviously, WWE is a small part of this, and in the big picture this is a step that in most cases would help workers earn more money and create more competition. California for the most part has already banned non-competes, although companies do put them in contracts and workers rarely challenge those provisions. After the final version of the Federal Trade Commission rule is passed, which the hope would be over the next several months, the rule would take effect 180 days later, so likely toward the latter part of 2023. Others believe such a law would be vulnerable to legal challenge. Another question this would entail is how it would affect startups. For example, when WWE purchased WCW, or when UFC purchased Strikeforce and Pride, part of the deal is that the prior owners, whether they be Turner Broadcasting, Scott Coker, and Silicon Valley Sports, and Nobuyuki Sakakibara and Company, after selling, could not legally start up a new company. In the case of Coker, he was hired by UFC and worked there for a number of years. When his non-compete ended, he was able to go to work in his current position with Bellator. Ted Turner had a multi-year non-compete with the selling of WCW. So he was not allowed to start up a new company. When that period was over, Turner and Bill Shaw did have conversations with Jim Barnett about starting up a new wrestling company on his stations, but the discussions didn't go far because Barnett estimated the startup costs would be about $50 million, and that was more than Turner was willing to earmark at the time. Sakakibara started Risen after his non-compete period ended. One can argue that if one was buying a company, the idea that they couldn't stop essentially the company from reopening immediately under another name would be unfair to the purchaser. Just a few days into 2023, Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay put on a match that exceeded the ridiculously high expectations people had for it, and one that could be hard to beat for Match of the Year. New Japan's biggest event in years also saw the debut of Mercedes Moné, the former Sasha Banks, who came out after Kairi had retained her IWGP Women's title over Tam Nakano. This led to the immediate announcement of her New Japan debut challenging Kairi for the title on the February 18th Battle in the Valley show in San Jose, California, which will be a pay-per-view. Moné is expected to work selected New Japan shows as well as the April 23rd Stardom show at the Yokohama Arena. This immediately led to speculation she would also be AEW bound and debut on the January 11th show at the Forum in Los Angeles. What is known is that AEW announced Toni Storm as Saraya's mystery partner on that show against Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter. Many expected Moné/Banks in that position, and AEW basically had to announce that or risk a terrible live crowd reaction to the match. Baker did make a reference to the idea that she's the boss of the AEW Women's, the Banks nickname. Some took that as an idea that while she's not in the match, she will show up to wrestle Baker. All we know is that Banks did tell friends she was not going to be in Los Angeles, and multiple people in WWE were of the belief that she would not be there as well. Whether this is meant to be a swerve and she'll still show up is unknown, but those in WWE were under the belief she wouldn't be there. She is a free agent and there is nothing legally preventing her from being there. She could sign a short-term deal with New Japan and still return to WWE at some point. It's of no value for AEW to sign her to a short-term deal that would allow her to go back to WWE, so going to AEW would mean she likely would not be able to go back to WWE for several years. Anything is possible, but I can't imagine after the William Regal situation that Tony Khan would set himself or somebody being heavily focused on his television and then leave in a short period of time. Britt Baker's line that in AEW she's Jamie Hayter, The champion and I'm the boss definitely has people thinking it was the hint she'll be there in one way or another if she's coming to AEW. This would be the show for her to appear on. Given its Los Angeles and WBD execs will be there, it is clear that if Banks was coming top AEW, this was the show to make the debut. Her debut in New Japan was exactly as expected as far as when and what it was going to lead to, but it did not go well. After Kairi beat Nakano in a short match to retain the title, she came out. The reaction wasn't big. Those there live in attendance said that most fans did not know who she was, since WWE has had no television in Japan for a long time, and most New Japan fans aren't fans of WWE or women's wrestling. She changed her hair color. Kairi offered her a title shot and they shook hands. Then she did a move that was supposed to be something like a Goria special into a DDT, but it was botched and Kairi landed on her knees. Monet cut a promo and said she was the CEO of the women's division, and she talked about wrestling for both New Japan and Stardom and mentioned being at the February 18th Battle in the Valley show in San Jose, which is where her title match with Kairi will take place. Right now there is a working idea of a second Kairi vs Mercedes match on a Sumo Hall show for New Japan. As far as a debut went, it fell flat live and the promo wasn't anything of note. The question is whether she can be the huge difference maker for New Japan internationally, like Chris Jericho was. The fact she would be there was kind of well known outside Japan, although Bushiroad CEO Takaki Kidani did tease it. It appeared the biggest thing on the show was the return to New Japan of Omega after 4 years. Omega came across as the biggest superstar on the show to the live audience, and they sold 26,085 tickets, the largest non-WWE pro wrestling crowd in 3 years anywhere in the world. The very noticeable thing was how Omega came across far more like a larger-than-life superstar in Japan than in AEW. Evidently the promotion had a lot of sign-ups for the service coming into the show and the day of the show, although they did not announce a number. What was announced is that 92,409 different subscriber logins were watching live, about 28,000 watching in English and 64,000 watching the Japanese feed. Keep in mind that most Americans would not figure into that because the majority didn't watch it live because of the time zone issue. Also, like with me, we had multiple subscribers watching together but it only counted as one. But it was the most watched event in the history of New Japan World and perhaps an even better sign than the live attendance, because the atmosphere still isn't back to normal at live shows, but the paid subscribers watching live does indicate overall interest level in the show. It's still nothing close to an AEW big show, let alone a WWE major show that would be watched live by well over 1 million. It was noted that they sold more tickets for this show than the combined tickets for 2 dome shows in both the years 2021 and 2022. While not the sellout that they did in 2019 and the first night of 2 in 2020, this show and the Noah show a few days earlier were the most positive live attendance signs of rebound that the Japanese industry has seen since COVID. The show was also, due to Banks and Omega, the 11th most searched topic on Google on January 4th. It was the first time a Japanese show had ever cracked the top 20 for a day. Except for WWE and AEW pay-per-view shows, or a death or an arrest or Vince McMahon type news, wrestling is almost never top 20. Even John Cena's return on December 30th that did a monster television rating didn't crack the top 20. Ticket sales for the San Jose show were ahead of the final total for the last show, about 1,500, in that building even 2 months before the show. They sold about 400 tickets after the announcement of Monet on the show and were at 1,885 out of 2,152 by the afternoon of January 5th, so it will almost surely sell out for her first non-WWE match. Both Bayley and Trinity Fatu Naomi went to Japan to be there with Banks. Both are close friends with her. There was also a photo taken with Fatu, Monet/Banks, FTR, who were close friends with Banks and Bayley from WWE, Samurai del Sol/Kalisto under a mask, and a former senior producer in WWE who was friends with them. Hours before the show, Banks sent out tweets thanking the WWE, its fans, Vince McMahon, Triple H, William Regal, and the WWE performers. Omega defeated Ospreay to win the U.S. title in a match that garnered a lot of attention from great promo work by both men and Don Callis the day before at the press conference. The idea was to create a series of matches, where the idea is that Ospreay was better athletically than Omega, but not better mentally, and in time he perhaps would be able to beat Omega. But Omega said this wasn't that time. In the post-match press conference after his win, Omega even said that 364 days of the year, Ospreay was the better wrestler of the two. The two did a long match based on a lot of selling by Ospreay, covered in blood after a DDT onto the exposed metal top turnbuckle. The idea was to do a number of big moves, but to hold back on it because this was to be the first match of a series, and not the blow-off match that this was just the start of the build for. There is no date planned for a second match. Interestingly, AEW never mentioned the match coming up on Dynamite or Rampage, and also never mentioned the match hours later on television when it was so heavily talked about on social media, and even backstage at the show. The expectation is that it will be covered on AEW television sooner than later. The match really overwhelmed the IWGP Championship match. It was the typically excellent match where Kazuchika Okada beat Jay White to win the IWGP Heavyweight title. The show was a tribute to Antonio Inoki, and Okada, the modern-day version of Inoki, had to win. He came out in a robe similar to Inoki, incorporated a few Inoki moves including the Enzuigiri, and after winning, was crying while talking about Inoki watching the show from heaven. The show literally had to end with Okada doing the Ishii ni Sanda chant Inoki was famous for while playing Inoki's famed entrance music, so there was really no choice but Okada winning. Under any circumstances, given that White had beaten Okada 4 of their 5 singles meetings, Okada was likely winning this match, making him, if you include the IWGP Heavyweight title and World title as the same historical belt, his 7th reign, one under Hiroshi Tanahashi's record of 8. The next day, New Year's Dash, Omega and Okada teamed up for the first time in the main event in an unannounced match on a surprise show, beating Jeff Cobb and Aaron Henare. During the show there was a backstage altercation between talent from Pro Wrestling Noah and New Japan's Lidge faction. This was to lead to the second Wrestle Kingdom show this year, built around Noah vs. New Japan matches, that takes place on January 21st at the Yokohama Arena. It's part of 2 straight nights of pro wrestling at the building since Noah has the final match of the Great Muta for January 22nd in the same building as part of a trios match where he teams with Sting and Darby Allin. It will be Keiji Muto's next to last match as his retirement show will be a Noah show on February 21st at the Tokyo Dome. The January 21st Yokohama Arena show has Kosei Fujita and Ryohei Oiwa of New Japan vs. Taisha Ozawa and Yasutaka Yano of Noah, Oscar Loiba and Tomohiro Ishii of New Japan vs. Masa Kitamiya and Daiki Inaba of Noah, Hiroshi Tanahashi and Toru Yano and Satoshi Kojima and Takashi Sugiura vs. Kenta and Namichi Marufuji and El Fantasma and Gedo, Mixed All Japan and Noah Team, El Desperado of New Japan vs. Yohei of Noah, Master Wato and Ryusuke Taguchi and Tiger Mask of New Japan vs. Alejandro and Hunta Miyawaki and Amakusa of Noah, Okada and Togi Makabe of New Japan vs. Kaito Kiyomiya and Yoshiki Inamura, meaning a match of each company's top star and champion, Okada and Kiyomiya, and then Lidge vs. Kongo Best of 5 with Bushi vs. Tadasuke, Hiromu Takahashi vs. Hajime Ohara, Sanada vs. Manabu Soya, Shingo Takagi vs. Katsuhiko Nakajima and Tetsuya Naito vs. Keno. The show will air on New Japan World as a pay-per-view show outside Japan, and on Abema TV as a pay-per-view event in Japan. The show featured 6 title changes. There were Okada and Omega's win. Hiromu Takahashi won a 4-way for the IWGP Junior title over champion Taiji Ishimori, as well as Master Wato and Desperado. It was Takahashi's 5th championship win, putting him tied for 3rd place with Koji Kanemoto behind Jushin Liger at 11 and the current Tiger Mask at 6. Tama Tonga won his 2nd never title beating Carl Anderson, so WWE did, and from all accounts this was not easy at all, agree to let Anderson lose on a New Japan show. It also made it a unique show since it had talent contracted to WWE and AEW on the same show. Zack Sabre Jr. became the first New Japan World TV champion beating Ren Narita in the tournament final. And tag team tournament winners Hiroki Goto and Yoshihashi beat FTR to win the IWGP tag titles. FTR was always dropping the titles on this show, but Goto and Yoshihashi were not the original choices. Kairi and junior tag champs Francesco Akira and TJP, who beat junior tag tournament winners Leo Rush and Yo, were the only champions to retain. The next day at New Year's Dash, Shingo Takagi won a 4-way over Toru Yano, Great-O-Khan and Sho to start 2023 as he ended 2022 as the King of Pro Wrestling champion. After Okada had beaten White to win the title, Takagi came out and issued a challenge for the title and said February 1st, but it is believed he meant February 11th at the New Beginnings in Osaka show at the Edion Arena. Overall, the show, which lasted 5 hours and 50 minutes, was very strong in the ring. With the crowd still reluctant to cheer much, it didn't feel special early on. Past the large crowd did give the feeling that while things weren't fully back to pre-COVID levels, things felt the strongest in nearly 3 years. The show was also dedicated to Antonio Inoki, with large banners with his face around the arena, and both Okada and Tatsumi Fujinami gave speeches about him. During the show they announced that there would be a major movie about the life of Inoki that would be filmed soon. 1. Oleg Boltin drew Ryohei Oiwa in 3 minutes. Boltin is one of the best freestyle super heavyweights in the world, and he was coached by the Bushiroad-sponsored wrestling team and coached for amateur wrestling by Yuji Nagata. It was like a quick sparring match where he threw Oiwa around with fireman's carries and they exchanged moves. He did a couple of pro wrestling spots as well that looked smooth, taking one tackle bump and doing a high spot and leapfrog spot. The main take is that he's very agile and athletically coordinated for a huge powerhouse-looking guy. I think everyone would have liked to have seen this go longer. 2. Sho, Great-O-Khan, Toru Yano and Shingo Takagi were the winners of the Rambo in 30-37. This was an 18-man Rumble-style match with people entering every minute. The match had eliminations by pin, submission or over the top rope and would continue until 4 men were left. They would then meet the next day in a 4-way for the King of Pro Wrestling belt. Sho opened against Hikuleo, Evil, with Dick Togo, and Tomohiro Ishii were next in. Okan and Daoki were next. It was basic stuff but Daoki looked good. Rocky Romero was next in. Sho went to tackle Romero who sidestepped him and Sho hit Evil, knocking him to the floor and eliminating him. Kenta, Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Aaron Hanare were next in. Good action with Ishii and Hanare. Ryusuke Taguchi was next. Taguchi and Hanare dumped Ishii. Jeff Cobb was next in. Hikuleo dumped Daoki and Kanemaru. Shane Haste and Mikey Nichols were the next 2 in. Haste dropkicked Romero out. Haste and Nichols did a double-team DDT on Taguchi and Nichols pinned him. Yujiro Takahashi was in. No Peter with him even though this was the Tokyo Dome. Okan clotheslined Hikuleo out. Haste and Nichols threw out Cobb. Nichols was thrown into Haste and Haste was eliminated. Okan and Hanare threw out Nichols. El Fantasma was next in. Hanare was on the apron after going over the top. Fantasma gave him the titty twister and he fell off the apron. So this may have been the first titty twister elimination in Battle Royal history, or at least in New Japan Battle Royal history. Taichi came in and did a sumo battle with Okan and threw Okan. Takagi was next in. Everyone joined together to throw out Taichi. Takagi threw out Yujiro Takahashi. Kenta was eliminated. Takagi knocked Fantasma off the apron. Fantasma flew and landed with his feet on the barricade. Kenta and Yujiro Takahashi then picked him up and threw him back in since his feet never hit the floor. Kenta, who was eliminated, ran after Takagi who moved and Kenta knocked Fantasma out of the ring. 2 stars. 3. Togi Makabe and Yuji Nagata and Satoshi Kojima beat Tatsumi Fujinami and Minoru Suzuki and Tiger Mask in 9-10. This was an Inoki tribute match, with the idea you had veterans who were around that were connected to Inoki. Mixed bag here. Tiger Hattori came out of retirement to referee. Fujinami, who was always decent and fun to see because he looked so good for his age, was either injured or has declined. He was hunched over, did nothing but dragon screws, and even those didn't look good. The stuff with Suzuki and with Nagata and Kojima was very good. Makabe hit Tiger Mask with a power slam and lariat. It looked like the finish was supposed to be Makabe sitting down and stopping a Tiger Mask move. It was botched and Makabe pinned Tiger Mask. Fujinami then talked about Inoki and did the Ishi ni Sanda, while Inoki's music played. 2 1/4 stars. 4. The main card opened with Francesco Akira and TJP retaining the IWGP Junior Tag titles over Leo Rush and Yo in 10:29. This was all action and really well wrestled. Yodo on both and then Rush did an Osai moonsault on both. Rush took a double-team facebuster on the ramp. He was all busted up because the ramp was not a smooth surface which made it dangerous for no good reason. The injuries took him out of PWG Bola this weekend. Excellent action ending up when Yo went for direct drive but TJP cradled him for the pin. 3 3/4 stars. 5. Kairi pinned Tam Nakano to retain the IWGP Women's Championship in 5:47. This was noted as being the first women's singles match at the Tokyo Dome since 1994. This was more like a high-speed title match with move after move than a dramatic major singles title match. Nakano did a crossbody 2/3 of the way across the ring. Nakano got near falls with a beautiful German suplex and a Steiner screwdriver. Kairi hit 2 hard spinning backfists and got the pin with the insane elbow. Mercedes Moné came out with a new hairstyle and high heels. Kairi offered her the next shot at the title. They took hands and then Moné laid her out with whatever her new finishing move is to be called. I expect Moné to end up as champion unless she's working so few dates it doesn't make sense, because they want to get the value of the belt high and worldwide. Putting it on her would be the highest value they could have for the belt. 3.25 stars. 6. Hiroki Goto and Yoshihashi beat FTR to win the IWGP Tag titles in 10:10. Really good given the time limitation. Dax Harwood was still moving like he was hurting bad, but in the ring he's always in the right place and just a great working pro wrestler. FTR was kissing the belts before the match. Cash was great. They missed the press conference and had the travel day from hell to get to Japan, with 2 flight cancellations and a 7-hour drive to get a new flight. But they made it. Harwood did the superplex off the top and Wheeler did a frog splash for a near fall. Goto busted his mouth open. Wheeler did a dragon suplex on Goto and Harwood did a bridging pin, but Yoshihashi saved. They did the big rig on Goto, but Yoshihashi saved again. FTR did a spike driver on Yoshihashi, but Goto saved. Yoshihashi got out of the big rig, superkicked Harwood, and Yoshihashi pinned Harwood after the double team Shoto. 3.75 stars. 7. Zack Sabre Jr. beat Ren Narita in 10:32 to become the first New Japan World TV Champion. Sabre now has total bleached blonde hair like Okada. Excellent wrestling. Both would sit down and let the other kick them as hard as they could in the back. Narita really laid them in. Narita did his bridging suplexes and Sabre did his great mat work. Narita dropped Sabre with a slap and went for a choke. Lots of great near falls. They traded German suplexes. Sabre blocked an overhead suplex and got a great cradle near fall. Both traded in and out of abdominal stretches until Sabre transitioned into an armbar and got the tap. After the match, Mikey Nichols and Shane Haste came out and asked Sabre to join TMDK. All three were affiliated together years ago in Pro Wrestling Noah. They offered Sabre a TMDK t-shirt. He teased throwing it away but then put it on. Sabre is a star here, so this elevates Nichols and Haste's standing in the company. 4 stars. 8. Tama Tonga pinned Carl Anderson to win the never openweight title in 9:36. Anderson got the early edge with a belt shot and dropping his neck on the barricade. Anderson used a Rikishi driver. Tonga did a splash off the top rope. There were all the gun stun blocks. Tonga used an Oscutter. The match was going along well until Tonga used the gun stun that was supposed to be the finish, but it looked bad. Anderson should have kicked out and they should have improvised because the finish came off flat. 2.75 stars. 9. Hiroshi Tanahashi and Keiji Muto and Shota Umino beat Tetsuya Naito and Sanada and Bushi in 9:20. This match was weird. Sanada looked really good. The idea of the match was to put Umino in with 2 legends and have him shine and get the win. Muto has a rep these days for it being all about him. Sanada was a protege of Muto, including the moonsault as big move. Sanada used it for a near fall. Muto went up for a moonsault but Tanahashi talked him out of it. Muto did his power elbow on Sanada. Umino was technically very good. There was a triple submission spot with Muto having the figure 4 on Sanada, Tanahashi with the cloverleaf on Bushi and Umino with an STF on Naito. The finish saw Muto hit Bushi with a Shining Wizard and Umino pined Bushi with the Death Rider. Muto just left the ring immediately rather than sharing the spotlight with Umino and Tanahashi. So the idea of the post-match photo op and pose with the idea of the legend of one generation of New Japan, the legend of the next generation of New Japan and the future of New Japan for symbolism never happened. Muto's leaving, since he was in his last ever New Japan match, with the spotlight away from Umino's win. 3.25 stars. 10. Hiromu Takahashi won the IWGP Junior title in a 4-way over champion Taiji Ishimori, along with Master Wato and El Desperado in 16:42. Great match. Ishimori hip-tossed Desperado on the ramp. Ishimori did a moonsault to the floor on everyone. They teased a 4-way countout and everyone jumped in at 19. All kinds of flying moves and submissions. Takahashi tried a sunset flip powerbomb on Ishimori, who flipped over on the floor and landed on his feet. Desperado did a tope con gyro on Ishimori and Wato did a flip dive on Desperado. Hiromu came off the top rope with a senton on everyone. They were back to getting near falls on each other with one of the other guys breaking up the pins. Wato had Desperado pinned but Ishimori pulled the ref out of the ring. Ishimori hit Wato with a chair to the back. Ishimori went for the bloody cross on Wato, but Wato got a great cradle and Takahashi made a last-second save. They really got the crowd behind Wato with all his near falls before Takahashi hit Time Bomb 2 on Wato and got the pin. 4 stars half. 11. Kenny Omega pinned Will Ospreay in 34-38 to win the U.S. title. Omega was the first U.S. champion, winning it in a tournament in Long Beach, California, where he beat Ishii in the finals. Among the amazing aspects of this is Omega going so long at such a high pace in his second singles match in 14 months. This was an incredible mix of drama, storytelling, superstar auras, symbolism, and athleticism. It was also quite dangerous in spots. Omega used his old New Japan theme at the press conference and Ospreay used his current one. But here Omega came out dressed as Sephiroth, the bad guy in Final Fantasy VII, whose theme Omega came out to is the song One-Winged Angel, which is the song that inspired the name of Omega's finishing move. He was clearly the heel. Ospreay, usually a heel, came out as a babyface to his babyface theme music when he was the aerial assassin. Don Callis was on commentary. Omega immediately hit a snap Hurricane Rana and Ospreay landed on his feet and came back with one of his own. Omega knocked Ospreay off the apron into the barricade and used You Can't Escape for a near fall. Omega undid the turnbuckles padding in the corner and gave Ospreay a teep kick into the exposed metal, followed by a hard backbreaker. Ospreay dropped Omega on the top rope and did a running kick. Ospreay used a stunner and a phenomenal forearm. Ospreay used hard chops and his dropkick and enzouigiri combination. They traded chops on the apron and Ospreay missed an Oscutter on the apron. Omega put Ospreay under a table and did a double foot stomp through the table on Ospreay. Ospreay suplexed Omega on the ring frame and did a sky twister off the top rope to the floor. Ospreay did a hard forearm smash to the back of the head. Omega blocked an Oscutter and hit a V-trigger. Omega hit a Poison Rana and a Fisherman suplex into a knee to the back. Omega worked over the kidneys. Omega went for a Dragon superplex but Ospreay thankfully landed on his feet and used a Paul Robinson special. Ospreay did all kinds of cheeky Nando's kicks to the face while Omega was tied up in the corner. The last one was brutal. It busted Omega's eye which started swelling shut. Omega's face actually had Ospreay's footprint on it hours after the match was over from that kick. Omega was back working on the kidneys and then used a DDT on the top of the exposed metal. Ospreay came up bleeding like crazy. New Japan does not generally allow blood so its effect is very pronounced these days when it happens. Omega used a Terminator dive, some Snapdragon suplexes and all kinds of palm blows out of the old 90s Pancrase and Ufi playbook. Omega hit the J Driller and Ospreay got his foot on the ropes. He hit a brutal V-trigger. Omega went to the top rope and Ospreay stumbled into the rope and Omega crouched himself on the top rope. Ospreay tried a top rope Frankensteiner but Omega blocked it and dropped him on the exposed metal buckle. Omega did a V-trigger to the back and a Kreutz Wrath off the top rope, which Ospreay kicked out of. Omega hit 3 V-triggers but Ospreay blocked the fourth one. Ospreay came back with Kauda kicks and chops. Omega went for a clothesline and Ospreay used a Spanish fly into a Liger bomb. Ospreay hit the Hidden Blade twice and an Oscutter off the top rope. Ospreay hit the One-Winged Angel for a near fall and the Spanish fly for a near fall, which was the story that he used the finisher of the two men who preceded him as the superstar foreign star of the company. Ospreay hit another Hidden Blade and Omega barely kicked out. Ospreay went for Stormbreaker but Omega escaped. Ospreay used another Hidden Blade. They traded elbows and Omega used a cross-arm German suplex. Ospreay then was just about done, spit on Omega and Omega used the Kamigoi, the finishing move of Kota Ibushi. Ibushi was part of the storyline as Omega teased it wearing the Ibushi t-shirt on Dynamite last week and in his promos talked about what Ospreay did to his best friend at the 2019 Wrestle Kingdom show when he gave Ibushi a concussion when he started using the Hidden Blade. Omega then hit the One-Winged Angel for the pin. Both guys were really beat up from this. 6 1/4 stars. 12. Kazuchika Okada pinned Jay White in 33:03 to win the IWGP World Heavyweight title. It started slowly coming off the previous match. The match was excellent but they simply couldn't follow the prior match. White used suplexes and hard chops. Okada dropkicked White, sitting on the top rope, knocking him to the floor. Okada hit a DDT on the ramp and used a missile dropkick. White used a German suplex. They did all the reversals. Okada hit the dropkick out of nowhere, followed by a tombstone piledriver, a lariat and cobra clutch. White finally made the ropes. Okada teased a flip dive but Gedo got in the way. Okada decked Gedo and hit a flip dive on both of them. Okada followed with a savage elbow. Gedo got in the ring and White went for a low blow but Okada blocked it and hit a forearm. White spit on him and used a Uranage and a back suplex over the top rope. White followed with a choke suplex and a Nagata-style bridging back suplex. White hit a brainbuster and went for the Blade Runner, but Okada reversed into a German suplex. Okada hit 2 Rainmakers but White ducked the third. Okada hit a dropkick and landslide. White used Rainmakers but Okada escaped from the Blade Runner and hit a Rainmaker for a near fall. They were on their knees trading elbows and got up and continued. White called Okada a coward and they continued to trade elbows. Okada was throwing hard blows. Okada then hit the Inoki Enzouijiri, hit a Blade Runner, a Cobra Flausian and a Rainmaker for the pin. After the match, Takagi came out and said that he lost to Okada 1 year ago, but he was the 2022 King of Pro Wrestling and had a great year and challenged Okada for his first title defense. Okada accepted. Okada then finished the show, issued a challenge to White for a rematch and said it was great to see so many people here. He started crying and talked about Inoki. He looked to the sky and asked Inoki if he saw our fights tonight. Okada said that the spirit you have given us will continue to burn and I hope you will have a watchful eye on us. Okada left the ring. Halfway down the aisle he said that we can't end the show like this, and then did the Ishii Inouye San Da call and the show ended with Inoki's music playing. 4 stars half. New Year's Dash on January 5th at the Ota Ward Gym in Tokyo drew 2,713 fans, which was the largest number they were allowing in the building, for a show built around a mystery match theme and the surprise that both Ospreay and Omega worked the show. The only thing advertised was the King of Pro Wrestling title match that Takagi won. 1. Evil and Yujiro Takahashi and Dick Togo beat Ren Narita and Tiger Mask and Tomoaki Honma in 8:28 when Evil pinned Honma with Everything is Evil after a magic killer. The heels continued to beat down Narita after the match and Minoru Suzuki made the save. The House of Torture crew beat down Suzuki until Desperado ran in. They appeared to tease the House of Torture, Evil and Yujiro and Sho, defending the trio's titles against Suzuki and Desperado and Narita. 2. Taichi and Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Daoki beat Will Ospreay and TJP and Francesco Akira in 9:17 when Daoki beat Akira with the Jorge Rivera special. Even though Suzuki Gun was broken up, you had 3 members together, plus Taka Michinoku in their corner, so they aren't that broken up. Michinoku teased the idea of the 4 of them forming a new group. There were post-match antics that teased Ospreay versus Taichi as well as TJP and Akira defending the junior tag titles against Daoki and Kanemaru. 3. Zack Sabre Jr. and Mikey Nichols and Shane Haste beat Haruki Goto and Yoshihashi and Tomohiro Ishii in 8:02 when Nichols pinned Yoshihashi with a tank buster. This clearly was building Nichols and Haste challenging Goto and Yoshihashi for the IWGP tag titles. Sabre and Ishii also had a stare-down, teasing a singles match with the 2 of them for the TV title. 4. Shota Umino and Togi Makabe and Ryusuke Taguchi and Yo beat Tetsuya Naito and Sanada and Hiromu Takahashi and Bushi in 13:17 when Yo pinned Takahashi with direct drive. Obviously that sets up Yo challenging Takahashi for the IWGP Junior title. There was also a heavy tease of a Naito vs Umino program, which was also teased a little the night before. 5. Hiroshi Tanahashi and Tama Tonga and Hikuleo and Master Wato beat Jay White and Kenna and Taiji Ishimori and El Fantasmo in 11:29 via DQ. The focus was on Tonga versus Fantasmo, so that's likely the never title direction. Geto tried to interfere but Tonga laid him out with the gun stun. Fantasmo went for a belt shot with the never belt, but the ref saw him and DQ'd him. White then cut a promo and somehow blamed Hikuleo for him losing the IWGP title to Okada and White challenged Hikuleo to a loser leaves Japan match. WWE has interest in Hikuleo so that could explain this coming out of nowhere. 6. Shingo Takagi became the first King of Pro Wrestling champion of 2022 in a 4-way over Great-O-Khan, Toru Yano and Sho in 12:50. Takagi pinned Yano with Last of the Dragon. The House of Torture kept helping Sho and tons of weapons were used. Okan used the claw slam on Yano but Takagi jumped in and got the pin after hitting Last of the Dragon. Okan and Takagi had stare down, so Takagi will be facing Okada for the IWGP title, but Okan looks to be his next challenger for the King of Pro Wrestling title. 7. Kazuchika Okada and Kenny Omega teamed together for the first time ever, beating Jeff Cobb and Aaron Henare in 13:36 when Okada pinned Henare after a Rainmaker. Okada and Cobb formed a team called the Omega Powers, a knockoff on Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage as he Mega Powers. Because the crowd didn't know about it, they went nuts seeing Okada and Omega as a team. Nobody expected Omega to wrestle on this show. There was actually a reason that will become a storyline a long time from now. They beat down Okada leading to the Omega hot tag. Cobb hit Tour of the Islands on Omega but Okada saved him. Omega and Okada did a double team V-Trigger and Rainmaker combination on Henare and Okada pinned him. Okada then cut a promo and once again Takagi came out to challenge for the IWGP title. Okada accepted his challenge. Cobb challenged Omega for the U.S. title. Don West, who made his original fame as a pitchman for the Shop at Home Network and later was Mike Tenay's broadcast partner for TNA Wrestling from 2002 to 2009, passed away on December 30 after a long battle with brain cancer. West was 59. West was first diagnosed with brain lymphoma in June 2021. He underwent 8 weeks of chemotherapy and 13 radiation treatments and was told in September that his cancer was in remission. But in December he found out that the cancer had returned and announced that publicly in January he began a second round of chemotherapy and more aggressive therapy. There were plans for stem cell therapy, but in May the tumor had grown to twice the size. The doctors attempted to treat him with experimental measures, but he progressively got worse. The irony is that West, just like Bobby Heenan and Gordon Solie, men who made their names with their unique verbal ability, all ended their lives being unable to speak. West was a huge sports fan, but not a wrestling fan at all growing up. As a sports fan, he was aware of the major 80s stars like Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper and other WWF names, but didn't watch the shows. He had a degree in sports broadcasting from Purdue, and the irony was that when he first applied for a job with the Shop at Home Network, where his brother Dale was the CFO, he applied to host a show called Sports Collectibles, but was rejected due to his voice. The voice and his over-the-top enthusiasm ended up being what he would later be known for. In 1991, he started as a pitchman on a television commercial for selling knives. In 1993, he was hired by the Shop at Home Network and was the most well-known personality on the network, which saw sales at only $3 million in 1993 and end at $150 million when he left in 2001. He was popular and well-known enough for his unique delivery that Will Ferrell parodied him and Chris Kattan parodied his co-host, Eddie Lewis, on 3 episodes of Saturday Night Live. According to Mike Tenay, it was a great source of pride for him. He met wife Terry when both were working as exhibition bartenders. Vince Russo was responsible for him getting into wrestling. When Russo came to WCW in 1999 as head of creative, he wanted to hire West as an announcer. Negotiations never came to fruition at that time. West left the Shop at Home Network in 2001 for his first love, sports, hosting a sports talk show on WNSR in Nashville in 2001. The location ended up convenient since TNA made Nashville its home base during the first incarnation of the company. When Jerry and Jeff Jarrett started the company in the summer of 2002, with Russo as its first booker, although they told everyone involved that the rumors Russo was with them were false, West, Mike Tenay, and Ed Ferrara were chosen to be the first announcing team. The belief is that Russo would have again suggested him, but both Jerry and Jeff Jarrett were familiar with him since the Jarretts lived in the Nashville area. West had never been involved with wrestling when he did a practice broadcast with Ferrara and Scott Hudson for a Burt Prentice independent show in the area. Within minutes of his getting in the building, he got his first taste of the chaos of wrestling as Jim Cornette at the show spit on Ferrara because he hated Ferrara's Oklahoma character in WCW that was a cruel mocking of Jim Ross, including contorting his face to make fun of Ross Bell's palsy attacks. It was something that should have never been allowed on the air, but it was WCW and Russo was creative power and wanted to get back at Ross, who he perceived was his enemy in WWF. Cornette and Ross had been close friends since 1983 when both were working for Bill Watts. On his second time in a wrestling arena, he was announcing a live pay-per-view show. The idea was that Tenay would call the matches, and West was told by Jerry Jarrett that he was to be the voice of a fan who had never followed wrestling. Before the broadcast, Tenay picked up West at a Waffle House in Nashville and they drove to Huntsville, Alabama, together for the first Impact show on June 19, 2002. By the time they got to Huntsville, they were good friends, bonding over their respective loves of baseball and its statistics and its trivia, knowledge of other sports, and each's background in studying religion when they were younger and their uncanny memories, being able to recite Bible passages verbatim. West at one point had gone to theological college. West loved the crazy culture of pro wrestling, noting that after being in wrestling for some time and when he and wife Terry had dinner together with a neighbor couple, he said, "I can't deal with normal people. I can't relate to them." He noted that real-life people became boring as compared to the colorful and crazy people he dealt with working for TNA. He adapted so well to the wrestling culture, said Tenay. He embraced it. He knew it was for him. It fit like a glove. The two became close friends, frequently attending area sports events when going to the cities TNA taped in early. He was not well received at first because he was out there with his unique style and no wrestling knowledge. But he learned his role was to get the talent over. His style was very similar to Pat McAfee in WWE, but McAfee had been a fan since childhood and trained in the ring with Rip Rogers for years. But West learned the business, watched WWE, listened to Tenay as his mentor, and Tenay said that West was his best student as far as somebody that he had taught the business to. West also went out of his way to become friends with the talent, learning things about them to help in his quest to get them over. Sometimes the pairing was criticized for being too high energy, since Tenay had to crank his own presentation up just to keep up with West. But with the value of hindsight, when AXS shows the old TNA shows on Thursdays before Impact, the one thing that becomes so obvious is how much better the announcing presentation was then as compared to now. Jerry Jarrett felt that he didn't need another wrestling expert calling the matches since they had Tenay, and that West was supposed to react like somebody who was their idea of a fan, who would get hot at the heels and love the baby faces and go crazy when the action got hot. Being based in Nashville likely helped West keep his job when finances got tight in August of 2022. Told other reporters he expected $150,000 per week. However, those at TNA said that Jay Hassman, who handled their pay-per-view business, was giving them estimates each week of 50,000 to 80,000 buys each week, so they thought they were doing great until finding out later how badly they were doing, and it nearly led to bankrupting the Jarretts and the company going under. Little did they know that their Nashville publicity company's owner, Dixie Carter, was the daughter of a wealthy energy company owner. When Carter found out about the financial problems, she got her father to purchase the company for her, and the Jarretts avoided bankruptcy, and the promotion continued, to where it still exists today, more than 20 years later. Cutbacks led to Ferrara leaving, and with West in Nashville, they didn't have to fly him in every week since all tapings were in that city. Tenay felt that West was ahead of his time when it came to that role, noting the WWE's success with McAfee. West's over-the-top presentation, such as later becoming the babyface manager of Amazing Red, was the forerunner to McAfee jumping on the table for Shinsuke Nakamura's ring entrance. West eventually got involved in the merchandise side of TNA wrestling. He would travel with the talent at the house shows and became very valuable at pushing the merchandise like Jeff Jarrett guitars at the live events, and his famed Don West's insane daily deals. In 2009, Russo, who no doubt will tell this story differently, came up with the idea of turning West heel on Tenay. Russo had been in touch with Taz, who, like everyone else in WWE that wanted out, they were welcomed in TNA. It was the constant theme of the company, made worse when Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff came in and Russo was out. The ex-WWF guys were treated as real stars, and the homegrown guys like AJ Styles and Samoa Joe, who were super talented and pushed to a level, were never, even when they had belts, put over as stars as compared to the former WWF and WCW Attitude Era stars. West turning heel on Tenay hurt both as announcers since their constant spats seemed forced. The idea was for West to be a heel, but to many, it made Tenay a heel or both heels, which is not what your primary announcer whose job is to sell the product to the audience should be. Taz replaced West as announcer, but since West made the company money hawking merchandise, they explained it by saying West was promoted to oversee merchandise development and sales. He was brought back a few months later, turned babyface, to manage Amazing Red. Tenay noted that everyone liked West. The one he wasn't sure of was when Cornette ended up working there, because he thought Cornette wouldn't like West as an outsider to the business and that West loved sports and Cornette didn't. But Tenay noted that the two became great friends. He won Cornette over. I never saw that one coming. He noted that Cornette loved West's cultural references on the air to movies and music and old television shows. While working on a TNA house show in Wenatchee, Washington, a city of 34,000 people known as the apple capital of the world for its many orchards, located on the Columbia River between Seattle and Spokane, he fell in love with the place. He got a place right on the river, and he'd love to just sit on his deck, read books and watch the river flow. At the arena, which housed the Wenatchee Wild hockey team, a junior classification team in the North American Hockey League, the team later switched to the British Columbia Hockey League. He met someone there, which led to him getting a job as director of sales and marketing for the team in 2012. His wife also got a job with the team, including working the concession stands. Don would at the home games hyping up the crowd before the game started and be the MC between periods. In 2016, he started working as a sports talk show host for KPQ, the news radio station in the city. He brought so much energy and laughter to our building, and we were very lucky to have him as part of our broadcasting family, said Laura Gooch, the station's media market president. He was a walking sports encyclopedia, a music aficionado, a television and movie buff, and he loved sharing his afternoons with KPQ listeners on the Don West Show. After West got the word his cancer was in remission, he attempted to return to this 3-hour shift, which he loved, but very quickly it became clear he was not healthy enough to do it. This has been a tough couple of years, just watching him go through this, said Bliss Littler, the general manager of KPQ. It's been tough, as we definitely lost a real good one. What I'd say right now is heaven's getting a first ballot Hall of Famer. Both WWE and AEW mentioned West's passing on the air. AEW had a graphic put up before the January 6th episode of Rampage. The commentary for that show had been done 2 days earlier, so it wasn't mentioned on the air. On the January 11th Dynamite, Excalibur said a few words about West. On the January 6th episode of SmackDown, Unlive, Michael Cole mentioned West's death. TNA noted that West had been in hospice care the last several weeks. He had been in contact with him, but it was so much like at the end with Heenan, where his talkative friend could no longer talk, only listen. TNA pushed the idea of him getting better and them going to the Chicago Cubs, West's favorite team, spring training games. Jeff Jarrett and Craig Jenkins were two of the few who really knew the condition he was in. When I received the text from Don's wife, Terry, earlier today his passing, I had an overwhelming feeling of mixed emotions, so happy and relieved for him that he was out of pain and his cancer was gone, but the finality of his death was so dark and it hurt, wrote Jarrett. We FaceTimed just a few days ago, and because of his situation, it's the only conversation that I've ever had with him that I got to do all the talking, and I'm sure he hated that. We reminisced, laughed, and I got the final opportunity to tell him I loved him and that I will see him again one day. Don was a major part of my career, wrote Chris Park, now a WWE producer who was one of TNA's top stars of the era as the Monster Abyss. Don always had a smile on his face, a good story to tell, a solid sports outcome to predict, and was always so happy and treated everyone who he came in contact with like a friend. Tommy Dreamer noted that the first time he met West, he was in a room with Taz and TNA as Dreamer debuted in TNA. Says, "Hey, nice to meet you. There's a bunch of idiots here, but you will have fucking fun," and walked out. TNA remarked about West, using the words Heenan told him many times years earlier. You can never be first, in regard to being his best friend. As for Heenan, that was always going to be Gorilla Monsoon, but damn, you're a close second. He told West the same words, in regard to Heenan being his best friend, but damn, you're a close second. Phil Baroni, a former UFC and Pride star, who also dabbled in pro wrestling, was arrested and is being charged with murder of his girlfriend in San Pancho, Mexico. A report from Tribune de la Bahia said that Baroni, 46, went to police officers saying that his girlfriend, identified as Paula, was unconscious in a hotel room in the city. Police found the woman lying down with no clothes on and covered by a sheet. The story stated that she had multiple marks and bruises on her face and other parts of her body. The police also found fresh bruises on Baroni's fists. When the officers got in the room, they found the woman dead. The story said that Baroni told police that at about 3 p.m. he was smoking marijuana and drinking beer in his room. He said that he and his girlfriend started arguing because she told him that she had sex with another man. He said that he threw her into a shower and she hit her head and fell to the floor. He said that she was trying to get up, but couldn't, and that he took off her clothes. He said she told him she was cold, so she put a sheet over her. He said they were laying there and she asked him to get her cigarettes and beer, so he left. He said he got them, returned to the room and laid down next to her, but she was unresponsive. He said that he believed she was asleep, but when he tried to wake her up, she wasn't responsive. He said he went to get help, and saw officers and called them into the room, where they found her dead. Baroni was then arrested for homicide and put in jail at the Municipal Administrative Court of Valle de Banderas in San Pancho, Mexico. An autopsy is being performed to find the cause of death. Baroni was a well-known fighter who had success early in his career but took many beatings late in his career when he got older and his reflexes slowed down. He grew up in Massapequa Park, New York, and his family lived next door to the parents of Jerry Seinfeld. He competed as a bodybuilder and was a two-time junior college All-American wrestler at Nassau Community College. He competed in 6 bodybuilding contests as a teenager, finishing either first or second each time. He wrestled later at Hofstra and Center Michigan University. He debuted in MMA at the age of 24, and in his second fight, beat Curtis Stout on a UFC show in Atlantic City, New Jersey on February 23, 2001. He was with UFC until early 2005, cut after losing to Matt Lindland, Evan Tanner, twice, and Phil Sell in succession. He then went to Pride, where he scored knockout wins over Ikuiza Minowa, Ryo Chonan, and had a 25 seconds knockout win over Yuki Kondo. He was best known for Strikeforce fight in San Jose, California, on June 22, 2007, where he lost via second-round choke to Frank Shamrock. It was one of the most heated MMA fights of the era because both men promoted a grudge hard in the media and Baroni cut incredible promos. The show drew a 1.62 rating even when airing in a 2-week tape delay since it was first on pay-per-view live, and is still one of the highest-rated MMA telecasts in Showtime history. At one point in the fight, Shamrock made a motion where he acted like Baroni was going to sleep, and then decked him and likely would have finished him, except he was pulled off for blows to the back of the head when attempting to finish. Actor Mickey Rourke loved the spot and used it for his pro wrestling character in the movie, The Wrestler. Rourke and Shamrock later became close friends. CM Punk also would use that to signal his go-to-sleep finisher in pro wrestling, also taken from that fight. Baroni was a pro wrestling fan and frequently talked about getting into pro wrestling, especially as his fighting career results started getting worse. For years he trained out of San Jose, and coach Javier Mendez tried to get him to retire because of the beatings he was taking. Still, he was a star and a name fighter, and UFC even brought him back for fights in 2009 and 2011 before he was cut again. He fought for One Dream at Bellator through 2014, and his last fight was on September 7, 2019, in Shanghai, China, when he lost to Saiwang via choke in a match for the Rebel FC middleweight title. He finished his career with a 16-19 record and may have been the best-known sub.500 fighter in American MMA history, for whatever that means. Baroni started pro wrestling training under D'Lo Brown in 2014. He fought in blood sport events, and Josh Barnett, the promoter, said that he could see something wasn't right with Baroni. Baroni also lost a bare-knuckle boxing fight to Chris Levin in 2018. Jake Paul has signed a deal to not only fight MMA with the Professional Fighters League, but to become a minority equity owner of the organization. It's a Hail Mary for both, as PFL tried a pay-per-view in November for its championship fights on ESPN+. For both, no numbers were officially reported, but the belief within the industry was that it did poorly. Paul, in facing his biggest name opponent to date, Anderson Silva, admitted the pay-per-view numbers were a disappointment, claiming 200,000 to 300,000, but with television buys in the US being only about 30,000, under the levels AEW does, it's hard to believe even those claimed figures. Paul signed a multi-year contract with the PFL to compete in the Superfight division, which would be exclusively on pay-per-view events. His plan for 2023 is to make his MMA debut in the division, and also to do one boxing match. There is no date nor opponent for either of his two planned fights. His role in PFL management will be head of fighter advocacy, meaning he will promote the league on social media. As part of the deal, Nakisa Bidarian, his promoter and business partner, the former CFO of the UFC, will also have an equity share of the company and assist with league operations and strategy, particularly in building pay-per-view events. The idea for the Superfight division is to sign pay-per-view draws, such as Nate Diaz, for fights that would intrigue the public. The big problem they will face is, as Paul vs. Silva showed, the novelty of that type of fight has run its course. There are few real money draws in MMA, and the type of money it would take to get them from UFC would not be a figure one could recoup doing non-UFC pay-per-view events, and certainly not more than one. Sure, Conor McGregor can draw big outside of UFC for the short term, but Bellator was unable to make pay-per-view work with names like Tito Ortiz and Rampage Jackson after their UFC primes. Paul may have one or two novelty fights if he tries MMA, but it isn't boxing against older and generally smaller non-boxers. His doing the same with past their prime MMA fighters would have a short shelf life. Right now the pay-per-view division would be built around Paul and Kayla Harrison, the league's most popular fighter who is coming off a loss to Larissa Pacheco, and has said she won't be competing any longer in tournaments, which PFL had been built around. Paul is interested in fighting Diaz twice, once under boxing rules and once under MMA rules, with the boxing match coming first. The New York Times noted that Paul is no longer under contract to Showtime as a pay-per-view boxer, which coincides with the disappointing number with Silva. Showtime, which isn't allowed to lie about pay-per-view numbers since it's a public company, has not released actual numbers for the Silva fight. Paul said he would beat Diaz under MMA rules. He was a high school wrestler and has 2 years of BJJ training, but when asked about how much MMA training he's done, responded like 15 minutes. He said he was going to start training MMA, doing jiu-jitsu and learning to use and defend kicks, which he has no experience in. The idea of the PFL Superfight division is to use celebrities who can fight along with serious fighters. Triller got into that game years ago when it was a novelty, and for the most part that has dried up. Mike Tyson was supposed to be the big draw, but he only fought once, looked good, and obviously there were issues since he never fought again. The PFL noted that they would pay pay-per-view fighters 50% of the revenue, as opposed to UFC, which pays substantially less. But smaller companies always pay a higher percentage of the revenue because they take in so much less money and don't have the following of UFC. The reality is that with 29 years of MMA as a sport in the US, the UFC is the only one that has ever been able to sustain a pay-per-view business. The story of John Cena doing his only match of 2022 on the last show of the year on December 30th from Tampa also led to WWE having its largest audience and most watched match of the year. The match, heavily promoted on all NFL broadcasts on Fox the weekend before, led the show to doing an average of 2,631,000 viewers and in 0.64, 843,000 viewers in 18 to 49, even with head-to-head competition of the Orange Bowl on ESPN. The Tennessee vs. Clemson game head-to-head did 8,590,000 viewers and a 2.00 in 18 to 49, monster numbers for a Friday night. Most likely without it, the SmackDown numbers would have probably been, conservatively, about 8% higher, meaning about 2.84 million for the show and 3.06 million for the main event, which are crazy numbers for today. The final quarter hour with the tag match did 2,832,000 viewers and in 0.73, 952,000 viewers in 18 to 49. It was the largest audience to watch a WWE television show since a December 25, 2020, show that was artificially boosted by coming directly after an NFL game. Prior to that, it was the largest audience since February 28, 2020, a show that featured John Cena's return to Boston and also featured Bill Goldberg. The return of Cena drew what was announced on television as a sellout of 15,738 fans. The WrestleTix number was 13,850, which for all real purposes was a sellout. There were some seats opened up the last day after production moved in, not sold, but they were scattered, and the paid number was 12,700. They moved more than 6,200 tickets after the announcement that Cena was on the show, and nobody for any show aside from Mania moved tickets like that this year. With Cena there, they shot several key angles, most notably a Charlotte Flair surprise return and SmackDown title win over Ronda Rousey. That title change was a late plan as Rousey was scheduled for a different direction, and in the pay-per-view lineups that were preliminarily made out in mid-November that went through WrestleMania, Rousey was still to be the champion originally. For the Royal Rumble on January 28 at the Alamodome in San Antonio, the only match announced besides the men and women's Rumbles thus far has been the Pitch Black match with Wyatt vs. Knight. Exactly what the rules will be hasn't been announced, but it's sponsored by Mountain Dew, which has a Pitch Black brand, so it's a match where the company was likely paid a good deal of money for. The country music singer Hardy, who appeared on Raw breaking a guitar over Solo Sikoa's back, will perform on the show, and one could see a bloodline angle coming from that. We did get a lineup that was with planned listing for the Royal Rumble written in mid-November, which listed the Pitch Black match, Reigns vs. Owens for the title, which they seem to be building, the Brood Edge vs. Demon Finn Balor in a Hell in a Cell match, and Rousey vs. Raquel Rodriguez for the SmackDown Women's title as the rest of the card. Obviously Rousey vs. Rodriguez was changed, and Flair vs. Rousey would make sense for the show stemming from this week's SmackDown. Regarding WrestleMania, when Rousey came back last year, the idea was to work with Flair at the 2022 Mania and with Lynch in 2023. Long-term plans always change, and right now there has been nothing in the Rousey vs. Lynch direction. Right now it is very unlikely that match will take place at this coming Mania. The show opened with a big number, 2,802,000 viewers and 0.69, 897,000 viewers in the first quarter for the Bray Wyatt/LA Knight segment. It hovered at the 2.5 million viewer mark most of the 2 hours except for the jump to 2,740,000 and 0.65 in 18 to 49 for the Flair title win. The idea of Shinsuke Nakamura being brought in from WWE and working with the Great Muta led to the most successful non-Tokyo Dome show since the pandemic. Pro Wrestling Noah announced a sellout of 9,500 fans for the first time. The company went back to Budokan Hall since the May 11, 2013, retirement show of Kenta Kobashi. They had a huge stage which blocked a solid percentage of the building, but there were only scattered empty seats, and it was the most packed major wrestling show in Tokyo in a long time. But it was a far cry from the most empty major arenas in Tokyo when all companies in Japan have booked them since the start of the pandemic. There were families with children who came to see Nakamura back, particularly chants from children for him, fans from the past who came back since Muto only has a few matches left, and this was a dream match, as well as the usual Noah fan base of 18 to 49 males. They put Muta vs. Nakamura on last, after the Kaito Kiyomiya GHC title match with Keno, which was the show stealer. But Muta vs. Nakamura came off as special, with Nakamura working hard against the 60-year-old legend with the artificial knees and very bad hip. The show generally got rave reviews since the main event worked, and the heavyweight and tag team title matches were great, plus they had a good big show feel. A few other keynotes on the show is that Jake Lee, who finished up at the end of the year with All Japan, came out after a Jack Morris win over Timothy Thatcher. Lee's big surprise appearance didn't get a big reaction. Whether he would have is a different story because they drew a crowd of fans from the past who came to see Muta and the idea of Nakamura wrestling in a Japanese promotion. That crowd was likely not following Lee in All Japan, even though Lee had been pushed as one of that group's biggest stars. Another surprise was the return of Hiroshi Hase, at 61, as a mystery partner in an 8-man tag. Hase is currently the governor of the Ishikawa prefecture after for years being part of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's cabinet. Before retiring from pro wrestling to go into politics, Hase was one of the best workers in pro wrestling and he looked great for his age, doing his trademark giant swing as well as winning with the Northern Lights suplex, a move he didn't invent, but did popularize in the 80s and 90s and put the move on the map internationally. In addition, Kenta and Namichi Marufuji, one of the greatest tag teams in company history, were put together to challenge GHC tag champs Takashi Sugiura and Satoshi Kojima. Kenta and Marufuji were named Tag Team of the Year in 2003 in Japan, and were generally considered the best working tag team in wrestling during that period, winning the 2003 and 2004 Observer Tag Team of the Year. But they had never held the GHC tag titles, because at the time they were junior heavyweights and there was more of a delineation of weight divisions. This was Kenta and Marufuji's first tag team match together since May 7, 2014. The two later feuded and had classic singles matches. During the show they announced that the Keiji Muto final match show on February 21st at the Tokyo Dome would be on Abema TV as a pay-per-view show, and not on Wrestle Universe like this show. Even though it was supposed to be only clapping aloud, the crowd did make noise for the big stars and big moves. So they started to break protocol. People raved about the show as a whole, as it was said to have all good matches. One person noted that fans were confused as to what the rules were as far as allowing cheering because cheering was happening. The show with the big stage had production values at a lower level than usually seen for major Japanese shows. There were huge neon signage and top-scale lighting. It made for a nice entertainment spectacle like you'd get from WWE or AEW. 1. Yasutaka Yano pinned Taisha Ozawa in 401 with a fisherman suplex. Ozawa did a nice dropkick. 2. Masa Kitamiya and Daiki Inaba and Yoshiki Inamura beat Muhammad Yone and Akitoshi Saito and Shuhei Taniguchi in 848 when Inamura pinned Yone after a muso. The showcase was Inamura doing power spots. Kitamiya was in there just hours after doing a long 0-1 world title match losing to Masato Tanaka. 3. Ninja Mack and Dante Leon and Alejandro beat Shuji Kondo and Tadasuke in High 69 at 811 when Alejandro beat High 69. Ninja and Leon did some good high-flying moves. 4. Masaaki Mochizuki and Susumu Mochizuki and Mochizuki Jr. of Dragon Gate, Masaaki does regularly work for Noah as well, beat El Hijo de Dr. Wagner Jr. and Atsushi Kodoji and Seiki Yoshioka in 127 when Susumu beat Yoshioka with the Mugen package. Mochizuki Jr., who is 20, was very impressive and his father always looks good. 5. Hiroshi Hase and Kazuyuki Fujita and Kento Kashin and Nozawa Rongai beat Masakatsu Funaki and Katsuhiko Nakajima and Manabu Soya and Hajime Ohara in 1636. Hase pinned Ohara with the Northern Lights suplex. It was clear Ohara was there to lose to one of the names from the past. Hase was super over as the surprise. He also looked good, and by good it doesn't mean good for a 61-year-old former wrestler, but good period. Jushin Liger was at ringside and Nakajima tried to goad him into the ring but Liger didn't comply. The crowd really got into Nakajima's hard kicks to the chest of Hase and Hase chopping Nakajima back. 6. Jack Morris pinned Timothy Thatcher in 12:16. Most likely the win by Morris here will lead to a GHC title match at some point. The work was solid, very good much of the way, but the match had little heat. Thatcher worked over the arm most of the way. Morris got several near falls and won with the Tiger Driver. 7. Amakusa retained the GHC Junior title pinning Hunta Miyawaki with a crucifix in 15 minutes. Pretty good with a lot of big dives. The point of the match was to show Miyawaki was a guy who could contend for a championship and had improved after 6 months in Mexico. Amakusa is the former Ho. Both did all kinds of great flying moves, Amakusa doing a springboard Hurricane Rana and a corkscrew tope, and then a tornillo in the ring. Miyawaki did an arm drag from the inside of the ring to the outside. It never quite hit the great level, but as far as showing Miyawaki at a higher level than before, most felt it succeeded. 8. Takashi Sugiura and Satoshi Kojima beat Kenta and Namachi Marufuji in 1840. Excellent hard-hitting match. Kenta looked better than he's looked in New Japan. The highlight was the Kenta vs Sugiura exchanges of forearms and slaps. Kenta hit the GTS on Sugiura, but Sugiura came back with an Olympic slam. Marufuji was landing knees and kicks on Kojima before Kojima hit the Stan Hansen-style Western lariats for the pin on Marufuji. I don't know what it is about these guys, but Sugiura and Kojima are both 52 and they move well, hit hard and take hard hits. 4 stars half. 9. Yoshinari Ogawa and Ida beat Yohei Inxi in 1917 to win the GHC Junior Tag titles. Good match, but they went a little longer than the crowd wanted them to give, and they were at this point waiting for the 2 big matches. The idea is Ogawa and Ida are having problems since they feuded in the past. Ida used a version of a GTS and then hit Imperial Uno to pin Yohei. Yohei Inxi dropped the belts that they had just won on December 23rd. This was said to have been positioned badly because people really didn't care about it and should have been earlier in the show. 10. Kaito Kiyomiya retained the GHC heavyweight title over Keno in 1923. Hard strikes and big bumps, most notably Keno dropping Kiyomiya with a falcon arrow off the middle rope outside the ring onto the apron, and Kiyomiya landed halfway on the apron with his back cracking on the ring frame. The two really went out to steal the show. These two have had a lot of classic matches and this was one of their best. Keno went for a dragon suplex, but Kiyomiya landed on his feet and hit a shining wizard to the back and to the front. Kiyomiya hit a poison rana. Kiyomiya retained after a full Nelson drop that he transitioned into a powerbomb, followed by a shining wizard. I really love this match as it just felt like pure high-class pro wrestling with no gimmicks at all. Both men had gone public saying that they wanted to make sure that they had the best match on the show and that the world title match wasn't considered secondary to Muta vs Nakamura. 4 stars half. 11. Shinsuke Nakamura pinned Great Muta in 1819. The crowd was buzzing at the start. Both had big ring entrances, with Nakamura is a large white flowing Shinto robe with his entrance music being played live by violin as well as drums. The crowd cheered both men. Once the bell rang, it was clear Muta would work as the heel, which is what fans wanted to see from him with a gimmick. The match was your classic smoke and mirrors match. The one thing was that Nakamura came across as a tons bigger star here than he does in WWE. Muta choked Nakamura with a cord, used an STF and a dragon screw. Nakamura did the double knees and Muta used a dragon screw, knee bar and figure 4. He missed a shining wizard and Nakamura used a spinning heel kick and a sliding German suplex. Muta used mist on Nakamura and tore up his costume and was choking him with it. The ref was knocked down. Nakamura used punches and a knee drop. Nakamura did a wind sprint lariat, which was one of Muta's trademark moves when he was younger and could run fast. Nakamura also used a flying armbar. Muta against used the mist and a shining wizard to the front and back. Nakamura hit the Kinshasa. Muta went to spit the green mist, but Nakamura sucked the green mist out of his mouth, looking like he was kissing him. After sucking the mist out of Muta's mouth, Nakamura blew it make in Muta's face, a finish that Will Ospreay came up with in a match with Bushi a few years ago. Nakamura then hit the Kinshasa for the pin. It ended with Nakamura saying how happy he was to be able to wrestle his idol on this show, and he and Muta left together.